I made a video about a year and a half ago about all the different ways you can get food in Don't Starve Together to grow in your base. And there are many ways to do this. I spoke about some of the best and most consistent ways to do this, and I spoke about some of the worst sources of food as well, and some of the common mistakes that people make in regards to food in the game. However, in the 15 months or so since that video was released, Klei has gone through and made sweeping changes to pretty much everything I spoke about. I mean, look at the thumbnail. This farm doesn't even exist anymore. So, making this video has been something I wanted to do for a while now. My aim is to give you guys a good understanding of just how many ways there are to feed yourself in this game. I'll give you all the options, and you can go with whatever best suits your playstyle, your character choice, and your current situation. And I'm going to start with the methods that are the easiest to set up, the most beginner friendly ones, and the ones that give a lot of return for not that much effort. And we'll slowly work our way down to more difficult setups or ones that require a heavier investment to get started. But like I said, you can decide what will work best for you. And if you do go on to find this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up, and if you want more content like this, consider subscribing as well. It doesn't cost anything and it really helps me out a lot. So, starting from the beginning, when you first jump into a world with nothing, you're probably going to be looking for things you can forage to keep you fed in the early days, and the game does a pretty good job of offering a lot of food just lying on the floor. Carrots and berries or juicy berries are often quite abundant near the starting area. Even seeds will keep you going in a pinch. I often will eat these foods while I'm exploring the world, but once you've settled down, you definitely will want something more dependable. If you have a shovel, you can dig up the berry bushes you come across and replant them all together for a good early source of food. You do have to fertilize the replanted bushes before they start to grow again, and then again after every few harvests, which can be a bit of a pain early on, but the berries that you get plus the drumsticks you can collect from killing the gobblers make it more worth the effort. Turkey dinner is also Wigfrid's favourite food, so it might be worth slightly more consideration if she is your main character. For a long time, this was without a doubt my go-to method for food in the early game, collecting berry bushes, setting up a few crockpots and just spamming meatballs. Besides the need for fertilizer, the only real downside is that the bushes require an ice flingomatic to keep them going in summer, and they don't grow at all in winter. However, you could easily substitute berries and drumsticks for ice and monster meat from hounds during the cold times. However, since the Reap What You Sow update, I've found myself pretty much skipping berry bushes entirely, or sometimes I'll collect them out of habit but then never even plant them. And one of the reasons for that is that farms are now better in pretty much every way. The only requirements are a garden digamajig, a garden hoe, and some seeds. That's it. One digamajig can give you 4 tiles of soil to plant crops in, and assuming you can plant 9 crops in each tile, you can actually fit more if you wanted to, but that's 36 crops in the same area that would fit 25 berry bushes. Not only that, but if you nurture your crops, water them, plant them in the right season, and with the complementary crops around them, you can get much more than 36. Up to 3 times as much, in fact. And this is a process you can repeat every few days, all year round. I'm not going to go into too much detail about this farming because it is pretty in-depth. It's almost like a mini game within the game, and there's a decent amount of learning involved if you want to understand the inner workings of it and not just plant stuff and leave it be. I highly recommend you check out the video I made about the update if you want a better understanding of how it all works. But even if you know absolutely nothing about farming besides what I just told you, you can almost guarantee in no time you'll find yourself with a much bigger harvest of crops compared to what you would have gotten from berry bushes. Not to mention there are 14 different fruits and vegetables you can grow that each belong to different crockpot recipes. Some of these crops are favourite foods like durian, potatoes, pomegranate. Some are used for spices with Wali or his unique recipes. Even the weeds you can grow have uses. There's really no reason to not have these farms as at least part of your food supply. And now for the second reason why I don't use berry bushes anymore, stone fruit bushes. Yes, you need to make a trip to the moon in order to get these, and that can definitely be a turn-off for some people, but they are absolutely worth the trip. If you're not quite sure how to find the moon, look for the parts of the land border that form straight edges and head out from there. There should also be no sea stacks between the mainland and the lunar islands, so that's a good indication that you're heading in the right direction. An average world will typically have around 30 stone fruit bushes that naturally spawn on the moon, and it might surprise you to hear that this is enough to keep any character well fed forever. And that's just eating the fruit raw. Weak fruit of course is an exception to this, but you can always use the stone fruit as filler for meatballs. Like berry bushes, stone fruit bushes also need to be fertilized initially and again after every 3 harvests. However, they grow all year round, and when you mine a stone fruit, there is a small chance that you will get a sprouting stone fruit, which when planted will grow into a stone fruit bush that does not need fertilization at all. Eventually, you might hope to have a full section of these, but the replanted ones will keep you nice and satisfied in the meantime, not to mention they have the added bonus of providing you with a steady supply of rocks. And while you're on the moon, make sure to grab some bull kelp. You can plant this on the water near your base for a year-round supply of kelp fronds, which can be used for a few unique crockpot recipes as filler, or dried on a drying rack for a pretty great sanity food that lasts a fairly long time too. And next is probably where I get most of my food from these days, and that is from animal farms. You can set up a farm for pretty much every creature in the game at this point, and while they tend to be quite a bit more costly in terms of time and resource investment, they'll often give you more than just food in return. The main ones I use are for pigs, bunnymen, spiders, and vault goats, but you can extend this further to splomonkeys, krampus, and even vargs. Most of these farms involve some kind of enclosure, either with fences or indestructible walls like statues or fossil fragments. Looking at this pig farm, there's also an enclosed bait to draw the pigs' attention and keep them out of their house during the afternoon and night time. This allows you to fight them during a full moon in their werepig form, which gives you a guaranteed pig skin as well as 2 meat. You can kill pigs every 4 days if you want to, but I would recommend leaving them for the full moon since you can fight each werepig individually and you get more loot. Bunnymen have the advantage of respawning after just 1 day, and even though their loot table isn't as great as werepigs, you can still gather a lot of food with them, and you don't even need a dedicated setup for this. You can find several bunnyman villages in the caves, often close to the sinkholes in relatively safe areas, and you can start a bunny war just by feeding one bunnyman a single carrot and pretending to hit another bunnyman. That's it. Just remember not to pick up any meat until they've gone home for the day. Eventually you can build your own bunny area closer to home and keep adding more houses as you get more resources from it, but this should keep you fed for a while. Setups for some other animal farms like vault goat farms and krampus farms are a little bit more complicated, and there are also ways that you can make the methods I've already mentioned more automated. I'm going to leave that for a separate video because there is a heap to talk about there, but it really goes to show the value of having meat as a food source. Apologies, wort mains. It's abundant, it doesn't spoil quickly, you can dry it for sanity or for longer storage, you can turn it into eggs by feeding it to a bird, and it's used for like 50% of crockpot recipes, and sometimes it literally falls from the sky. Frog rains in spring are probably something that beginners would dread. I know I hated them when I was new to the game, but you can literally sit next to some beefalo or a moose goose until it's over and collect hundreds of frog legs, plus the loot from whatever casualties they manage to take. And if you have a way to preserve this food, it will probably keep you fed for the rest of the year. And if you're lucky, you can get multiple frog rains each year. There was a time in my solo world where I would get 3 or 4 frog rains each spring, and I was just so sick of them because I didn't even need the food anymore. I would just use them to kill moose goose to get more down feathers. And speaking about food that comes to you, hound waves and deathworm waves are a pretty good source of food too. Assuming that you don't have much difficulty taking care of them, I think most people understand that with hounds you can go to beefalo if you don't have a tooth trap area or some other kind of defense or don't want to fight them yourself, and they will provide you with half a dozen monster meat every handful of days. And deathworms are, in my opinion, even better. They're a bit tougher to fight, but you get 4 monster meat each, as well as a glowberry, which is really handy if you're spending a lot of time in the caves or ruins. If nothing more, it's just a great top up for the food stores you already have. Other things I would put into this top up category are koala fence. 8 meat in a trunk is pretty great for about a minute's worth of work. There are even some exclusive dishes utilizing the trunk too. Lure plants probably fit into this category as well. Plant them on a boat or a turf that won't spawn eye plants, and outside of the winter, you have free leafy meat that you can harvest every few days. In my old video, I didn't rate lure plants and leafy meat that highly as a food source, but since then they've added a bunch of leafy meat crockpot dishes, including jelly salad, which is a pretty great way to get a sizable amount of sanity, and I've just come around on them. I'm a lure plant fan now. I even have a pet eye plant that I use to dispose of my rubbish. And this might be a bit controversial, but I would even put some bosses in the category of top up food. Obviously, if survival is a big issue for you, it might not be the best idea to pick a fight with bosses all the time, but every year that Deer Clop stops by, she brings 8 meat. Next, there are 2 naturally growing plant foods that I want to discuss together because they're kind of the opposites of each other. The first is cactus plants, and they are terrific, especially if you're living in the oasis biome or the D-fly desert. Put on a helmet or bramble husk if you have it, and go get yourself some cactus flesh. Not only is it a decent top-up food if you need filler in the crock pot, but every cooked cactus flesh you eat will give you 15 sanity, and it grows all year round. In contrast to this, you have lichen, which you can find on the way to the ruins biomes, and while cactus gives you sanity, lichen takes it away, but it is a pretty great source of food in the ruins, as well as emergency health if you have nothing else. I would often collect lichen as Wolfgang to stay at full strength. It does spoil very quickly though, so it's one of those foods that's best eaten straight away. If you're playing as Wily, it's a super handy filler ingredient for crockpot dishes when you find yourself in the ruins as well. And at this point of the list, there's only one other food source that I consider a staple, a must-have of every base I build, and that is bee boxes for honey. And the reason why I've left it this late on the list is partly due to personal preference. I tend to rely almost exclusively on meat and eggs, with honey being more of a luxury for me, and partly because I find bee boxes kinda annoying to set up early on. Each box requires a few boards, a honeycomb, and 4 live bees to craft, so if you want to build 10 bee boxes, you're going to need to be holding 2 stacks of bees on you, which is going to take 4 bug nets to catch. You can only catch them during the daytime. They don't come out in winter and are all hostile in spring. The bees can also die if you don't feed them. You can't bundle them up unless you want to have to catch them again when you unwrap the bundle. You also need to catch additional butterflies to plant as flowers so the bees can actually make honey. Without flowers, the bees will be useless. Getting the honeycomb is also annoying because you need to fight off countless killer bees that defend their hives. If you can, ask a friendly Wendy to do this for you. But despite all that, I still think having honey is great. And you can harvest so much of it that you could eat it plain if you want. I do this all the time as Wolfgang to maintain hunger and health. It takes 40 days to spoil, meaning it will last more than a full year in an icebox, and is used in some of the best crockpot dishes in the game, as well as making honey crystals which double your rate of mining, chopping and hammering. Yeah, honey is great. And from here on out, I consider these food sources to be either a luxury or opportunistic or just really not worth the effort involved, but still worthy of a mention at least. And what comes to mind first in this category is ocean fishing. I really want to like fishing. I would love fishing to be so worth the time and effort that you would be a fool not to jump on a boat and head out to the ocean, but currently that is simply not the case. Boats themselves are relatively expensive, requiring at least a dozen boards, plus a handful of rope, cut stone and silk. Then you need to actually find some fish to catch and work out what kind of bait it prefers, what lure should you use, what float should you use. Then you have to actually catch the fish, a process which can take a relatively long time, especially if you're planning on catching a fair amount of them. Thankfully, you don't have to deal with hound waves while on the boat, but you do have rock jaws, which are a pain in the ass, as well as Wavy Jones, who's just a troll. And for all of this, the best food you can hope to get is raw fish. which is basically the same as meat, except it spoils faster. The only crockpot dish you can make with this fish is surf and turf, which, don't get me wrong, is fantastic, but you can just as easily make it with freshwater fish or eels that you can fish from a pond. In fact, I would almost argue that fishing is more worthwhile as a way of generating bone shards than generating food. But I digress. We move on a little bit further downstream to where the barnacles grow. Now, I would wager that the vast majority of players either don't know that these seaweed things exist in the game, or found them because they were looking for something else and got lost. You can harvest barnacles from the weeds safely by shaving them during the night or playing as wormwood, and they can be used to cook 4 unique crockpot dishes. These dishes are honestly not that bad, they are just not worth the effort. Why bother building a boat and sailing off into the edges of the ocean when you can get the same benefit from meat and eggs? And it's the same deal with figs in the waterlogged biome. At least these have a very practical application for growing giant trees around your base, which look gorgeous. I suppose if you eventually plant and nurture a decent amount of these, you might end up with enough figs to make dishes like figatoni, which is quite good. But the process of planting and growing a giant tree takes around a full in-game season. This is simply not something that anyone should consider as an early food source, and by the time you have something like this set up in your base, you would already have better alternatives. I also want to give a brief mention to birch nuts. If you use Berga to farm birch nut trees for logs, which is recommended if you want her to stay alive, you'll probably have a lot of birch nuts. And I mean a lot. Possibly hundreds. Trail mix is also relatively easy to make and worth a solid 30 HP. I believe it's also Walter's favourite food, so not too shabby. There are ways to farm birch nuts with things like poison birch nut trees, but I don't know if it's really worth the effort. The option is there, I guess. And there are a bunch of other more opportunistic food sources like this in the game. If you're lucky enough to have a reed trap in your world, you can get stacks of monster meat by leading deerclops or Berga into it. There are many creatures you can kill like McTusk, tall birds, catcoons, butterflies, bats, frogs, cookie cutters, moleworms, and more if you just happen to need food and they're in the area. There are also food sources that are specific to certain characters, either requiring the character to create it, like with Winona's catapults used in different farms, or requiring the character to operate it, like Wickerbottom's books, or even foods that can only be consumed by a certain character, like WX and Gears. And I've been going on for like 20 minutes now, and I probably haven't even come close to an exhaustive list of all the foods you can eat and all the ways you can gather them. I haven't mentioned mushrooms or mushroom planters at all. I'm not sure if they're really worth mentioning, but if there's one thing I want you guys to take away from this video, it's that while this game may be called Don't Starve, starving really should not be an issue anymore. Maybe it was once upon a time, but if anything, the game has overcorrected for this problem now and just moved in a different direction. So now that you know all of these ways to generate your own food, you can finally start dying in new and exciting ways. So thank you guys very much for watching this video all the way to the end. It ended up being considerably longer than I anticipated, and yet there are still some bits that I felt I could have gone into much more detail, but left it in the interest of time. Maybe I'll do more deep dives in other videos, so let me know if you want anything like that in the comments. I'm happy to answer questions as well. You can follow me over on Twitch if you want to watch me play live and get answers in real time, or join in my Discord server where we even have our own dedicated DST server for any member to play on. But if I don't see you in there, I will see you in the next video. Take care.